The Robodebt Royal Commission, which was promised by Labor prior to the last election, delivered its report this week. It was a process that cost you, the taxpayer, $33.6 million. It's not as though, by the time of the election, the error of the blunt instrument that is income averaging hadn't been identified and rectified. We shouldn't also forget that it was a device invented by Labor when in power. So, if getting to the bottom of the issue wasn't the purpose of the Royal Commission, well, what was it? Quite simply, it was the blatant manipulation of a quasi-judicial process to allow Labor to perpetuate its attacks on the former government for longer. No doubt it is their hope that if they wave a Royal Commission report around enough and smear the reputations of others enough, along with putting up some shiny new grand gestures of dubious effectiveness, like, for instance, a constitutional voice, then people won't notice their utter failure to deliver on the basics, like a house that a young Australian can afford, like a school education that isn't having results in a downward spiral, like the skilled staff businesses need to be able to go on, or like groceries and energy bills that are within the means of ordinary people. As my colleague Chris Kenny wrote in the Weekend Australian, this is the weaponisation of quasi-judicial processes for partisan purposes, a very ugly aspect of US politics. He's not wrong. Dr. Scott Prasser, the bloke who quite literally wrote the book on Royal Commissions, said this, quote, "One concern about this Royal Commission was the Chair's opening statement in the report, which indicated that the Commissioner's mind had already been made up before the inquiry had started. Commissioner Holmes said, at the outset of my inquiry, I had anticipated that the Commission would uncover how such a patently unreliable methodology as income averaging, without any other evidence, to determine entitlement to benefit could become part of the Australian government debt raising or recovery scheme. This has been the problem with some recent Royal Commissions, which start on premises before actually collecting and assessing the evidence." That last paragraph belonged to Dr. Prasser, of course, and he's right. That paragraph does suggest that the Chair's mind, well, it had a clear view before she had entered into the process of examining the evidence. It's not a Royal Commissioner's job to engineer evidence to match one's predetermined political perspectives. In fact, it is inherent to the esteem in which they are held that should never happen. Both sides of politics need to think carefully about how they use Royal Commissions into the future. One glance at the matters the Commission was asked to look at in its terms of reference exposes it for the political witch hunt it was. But there is always a price to be paid for the political manipulation of quasi-judicial instruments for short-term political ends and efforts to get the scalp of one's opponent. And that is a reduction over the long term in the trust and esteem in which they are held by ordinary Australians. We already see this trend in relation to Australians' attitudes to and valuing of our democracy. Let's not also tarnish Royal Commissions.